This is number 7, class number 7, explaining the Mamar, the Chassidic discourse of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, made in 1986, Tafshin Mem Vav, explaining the sentence of Isaiah that on that day will be sounded, referring to the day when the Moshiach brings the total redemption of the Jewish people, that all the Jewish people will be gathered to Jerusalem, they'll all be woken up, their Jewish feeling will be woken up by the sound of a great shofar. And the Rebbe asks, what is this great shofar that is going to be sounded, and who is going to sound it? Obviously it's God that's going to make this shofar. And why will this awaken all the Jewish people? So the Rebbe says that nowadays, when we do sound the shofar on Rosh HaShanna, that it reminds us of what happened on that first Rosh Hashanah, 5,776 years ago, that God created the entire world, and on the 6th day, created man. And that's what we celebrate on Rosh Hashanah, the 6th day of creation, when man was created. And of course, God created the whole world for free, on his own. This is a tremendous kindness and tremendous love. Since that time, God has not shown such great love and kindness to the world. And that's why we say in the prayers of Rosh Hashanah that the sounding of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah is a remembrance for that first day. It's not as high. It's just a remembrance for that first day back there, 5,700 whatever years ago, that God, from his own essence, shined this kindness. Let's continue. According to this, so it comes out that in the service, the Israel of the Jewish people, that what the Jewish people do when in the synagogue, when they're serving God on Rosh Hashanah, chaser, it is missing mashu, something, chas v'shalom. It's not as high as it was back then when God created the world originally. When God created the world originally, it was pure godliness streaming down for absolute love, for no reason, just creation. And after the 6th day, so God said, now I'm putting everything into your hands. Everything depends on you, Jews, but you're not going to arouse the same level as it was back then. Said the Rebbe, if we use this explanation, which is valid, it comes out that something is missing. The world is not as high now as it was back then. Godliness is not as evoked by the Jewish people now as it was back then. Now it's just a remembrance of back then, the first day. So on this comes another explanation. What does it mean that Rosh Hashanah is zikaron? It is a remembrance, l'yom rishon, for the first day. The Inyan Zikaron, this idea of the remembrance, hu lamaliuto, it is showing that now is higher than it was back then. Sha'al yadei avodah, that by means of our serving God now, from our own free will, v'hazikaron, and the fact that the Jewish people remember and they remind God, so to speak, the Israel, mitosef, this adds ilui, an extra value, an extra highness, gadol, a great highness, yoter, even more, mikamo, than it was, biyom rishon, than it was on the first day when God created the world. In fact, every day it gets higher because now we are working, the Jewish people are adding to what there was back then. Albeit in a hidden way. Back then, it was a kindness that was revealed. God created the world. But now the Jews add something to that. The mikiv, and that since shalamaisa yadecha tichsov, that since that God desires maisa, to the deeds yadecha, of your hands, in other words, the Jews, tichsov, God desires, the Israel and Jewish people, mosifim, they add, koach, begavura shalamayla, the Jewish people add to the power of Hashem. Like it says, Tanu oz le'elokenu, give power to God. What does it mean, giving power to God? That when a Jew, from his own free will, decides not to be an egotist and to think only about the Creator, So to speak, that's something that God himself cannot do. God does not have a choice between bad and good, between being selfish or not. When a Jew does it, it's a novelty. This adds something to the creation and even to the purpose of the Creator. Even to the point that even God said, Haya lecha la'azreini, you should have helped me. It's a Gemara in Shabbat that Moshe, when he went up onto Mount Sinai, so he found God was making the letters of the Torah. And God said to Moses, this is hard work, you should have given me a blessing. That's what it says. Hainu she Yisrael, that the Jewish people mosifim, they add on, lo rak bebechinat gevura, not only in God's power, shalamayla, the power of God, ela gam bo ba'atzmo, that they actually add on to God himself. They provide God with pleasure. Harem muvan, if so it's understood, the hamshacha, that this blessing, shenasit achshav, that is made now, b'chol Rosh HaShanna, that we cause now, every single Rosh HaShanna, al yedei, by means of avodah Yisrael, by means of the service of the Jewish people, he nalit yoter, it's higher, mi'amshacha, than the blessing shayata that was, b'techilat abriya, in the beginning of the creation. The word hamshacha really means to draw down. In other words, the revelation of God. Mitzad, because of chafetz chesed, because of God's kindness. So it's true, when God created the world in the beginning, it was pure kindness on his part, pure godliness, pure love. But now the Jewish people, when they serve God and by means of changing their nature, it, so to speak, adds on something to the creation that wasn't there in the beginning. That which God, chafetz chesed, desired to do kindness for no reason in the beginning, who is lefi, because sheteva hatov leitiv, it is the nature of God, because God is good, his nature is to do good. Hine, behold, sheteva zud, this nature, hu bebechin is nalit me'od, is very, very high, like it's explained in Divrei HaMatchil Ata Echad, like it's explained in the Mamar, the Chassidic discourse of the second Lubavitcher Rebbe, Admor Emtzei. His name was Rabbi Dovber. Mikol makom, nevertheless, ein ze adayin ba'atzmuto mamish. This is not God's essence. What is God's essence? That God created the world in order that we should change ourselves and improve the world. That's what happens, Masha'enkin, which is not the case, Hamshacha, the blessing which is elicited, Shenaseh, by means of Avodat Yisrael, which is made by means of the service of the Jewish people, this somehow or other is attached to Atzmuto Yitbarech Mamish, God's essence. If so, the creation of the world was done from God's kindness, but the reason for the creation can only be revealed by the Jewish people. And that touches on a deeper level of godliness, in fact, to God's essence. If so, what we do on Rosh HaShanna, by means of sounding the shofar, is somehow or other attached to the essence of being, higher than any sort of reality, even spiritual reality, that we can possibly imagine. Something what was revealed at Mount Sinai, when it says the souls of the Jews jumped out of their bodies. That's what happens when we sound the shofar, but it happens in a hidden way. Al pizeh, according to this, Yuvan, we can understand, what? Sham Shachar, that the blessing of Rosh HaShanna, but called Shana, that Rosh HaShanna every year, he is, Nalad Yoser, is higher every year than the year before. Katzivoy, like the commandment, Malin B'Kodesh, we have to always increase in holiness. Ukamavur Ba'Girat HaKodesh, like it's explained in the second, near the end of the book Tanya. Shebechal Rosh Hashanah, that every Rosh Hashanah, Nimshach is drawn down, or Chadash, a brand new type of light, a brand new type of will of God, of pleasure of God, Elyon Yoter, that's higher, more, Shalo Haya, that was not a dayan yet, Me'olam, ever in the history of the world. Gam Lo Rosh Hashanah, Arishon, not even in the first Rosh Hashanah, when everything was so pure and man was aware, totally aware of God. Nevertheless, what we do through the darkness and the concealment that God has concealed, and also the result of our service of God is also concealed, nevertheless, the Rebbe assures us it's really higher. Even though Sha'olam al Mal'o Nivra, even though in the beginning of the creation, God created the world complete. What God does is perfect. When God created the world, it was a perfect world. What did He need us to serve Him? What is God lacking that we can serve Him? He needs a cup of coffee. He needs to have his shoes shine. What are we serving God? What does it mean? When God created the world was perfect. But the fact is that which the world was created perfect, Nivra, this is from God's point of view. Masha Ein Kain, which is not the case after this, Al Yedei Avoda, by means of our service of God, B'Sheit Alfei Shanin, this last 6,000 years, Ubefrat Acharei Matan Torah, especially after Matan Torah, after the giving of the Torah, when after the giving of the Torah, God revealed Himself in the world, and God revealed His will in the world to the lowest places, so that it was accessible to even the most simple and simple of Jews. And not only Jews, but also non-Jews. The 7 Noahide commandments came to the Jews when God gave the Torah. Hamshacha inalet biyoter. Every year, it's a higher revelation. Mikivon, since Shebakol Shana, since every year of HaShanna, Nitosev ba'avodah Israel. The Jewish people are adding good. And there's a general principle in Judaism that good is eternal. Bad can be wiped out. The essence of bad is that it's not really real. When a person does a sin, he chooses to live in a not real world. But when a person does something that's good, he's attaching himself to something that's eternal. Lochen, therefore, be called Rosh Hashanah, every Rosh Hashanah, Nimshach is drawn down, Or Chadash, a brand new light, a godly revelation, a godly blessing, more. Because it adds up to the good that was in the past. Ubefrat, and especially ba'avodah b'zaman hagalut, and especially nowadays, in the service that we do in the time of exile. Ubekol shechen v'kol v'chomo, it's more so now in the end of our exile, be'ikvete, in the heels of the Moshiach. Now we really need those blessings, and now when we sound the shofar, it's even more of a novelty, because the difficulties and concealments are much greater now. That now, it was then, the time of right before Moshiach comes, He ba'ofen da'asiya lashon kafiyah. Now we have to force ourselves. Fa'ad the kafiyah ha'achi gedola, to the greatest forcing. Right, in the time of the temple, you went to the temple and our people felt that they're just creations. They felt the Creator. They felt your responsibility to the Creator. Nowadays, you don't feel anything. What does a person feel now? He feels his wallet in his pocket. He feels if people are looking at him, if they're laughing at him. That's even worse. Nowadays, there's ribui nisionot. Now there's many, many tests, difficulties, trials. The al yivosh mipenei amaligim, of not being ashamed in front of people that scoff at him. When a person is doing commandments, there's people scoff, and they say, what are you doing these commandments for? For what? You're getting some money from it. You're getting some sort of a pension from it. Who's giving you? You're worried about going to heaven. You see heaven. You see you get any sort of blessings. You see the blessings. You're wasting your time. And you start to think, maybe they're right. What am I doing this stuff for? What did I keep in Shabbat? What's the difference between Shabbat and any other day? What's the difference between the Jews and anybody else? What's the difference between kosher and not kosher? People start laughing at you, and you really are affected by this very deeply. That it takes work nowadays to do Torah and commandments to go completely against your nature, like they did in Egypt, that they had to serve Paro and do what had to be done with self-sacrifice.